Resident Evil 8 is a really good game, and yet I don't think anyone would argue that the biggest cultural impact that game had on the world was Lady Dimitrescu. Other games in the Resident Evil series were genre-defining. The first one popularized the survival horror genre. The fourth one basically did the same but for third-person shooters. And then RE7 basically, I'm just kidding. First-person horror games already existed long before RE7, however that game did reinvent the series. RE8? Well, it was good, but genre-defining? Probably not. When it comes to Resident Evil, there's hundreds of games you can point to and say, that game was inspired by RE1, that one is like RE4. You can even find some that were inspired by RE5, but RE8? Well, actually, Stygian Outer Gods is currently in early access. There's only about 2 to 3 hours of the game so far, but what there is shows promise and has problems. I wanted to talk about this game because it's so very clearly derivative of RE8, which was in itself not the most original game. I was fascinated by it and how similar its opening looks to that of Resident Evil 8. I had to check it out. Stygian describes itself as a survival horror game with RPG elements, and the way those elements are implemented ranges a lot in quality. But before that, let me give you a brief introduction to this game. So the name Outer Gods immediately evokes cosmic horror. I didn't know what Stygian meant until just now when I looked it up, and it either means that it's connected to the river Styx, or that something is very dark. Anyway, where the game is at now, it's not much cosmic horror yet, those elements are only hinted at. What's in the game now is way more folk horror, like, you know, witches and shit. To be fair to them, cosmic horror stories often begin with folk horror, but if you're looking for eldritch horrors, they are not in this game yet. The storytelling in general in this game is a little light. Like, I'm gonna be honest, I played through the game 3 times, and I still don't know what the main character's name is. It's Jack, by the way. Anyway, the hook is simple. The game begins in a strange otherworldly realm full of carved stone and glowing green rocks. It turns out to be a nightmare, which then turns into a waking nightmare, and you get your first Sinner's card, which allow you to choose perks. You then meet up with your childhood friend Elizabeth, who asks you to come with her to a dusty old port town named Kingsport to find your dad, and off you go. You really don't know anything about anything at the start of this game, but if you want to exhaust every dialogue with Elizabeth, you can find some of it out. Also, just like RE8, Jack gets knocked out by enemies at the beginning and wakes up with Elizabeth, who then gives you your first quest. Alright, there's a lot to go over. I'm not really going to give an in-depth recap of the game because the story has no ending and I don't feel like it. Play the game, bro. So the Sinner's card I mentioned earlier, these are a little weird because there's 2 types of Sinner cards you can get. Ones that unlock new abilities and ones that upgrade your existing abilities. The first type are way more impactful but also more rare. One thing this game does that's kind of genius is that it has 2 very distinct combat paths that you can go down, melee or guns, but only one of these is really spelled out. You can get the ability cards to unlock backstabs, parries, and heavy attacks, and then another one to reduce the amount of stamina consumed per attack or increase damage. However, there are no explicit perks that mention anything about guns, no damage increases, no improved stability or reload speeds, nothing. Rather, you can get perks that help you scavenge for supplies, such as Leverage, which allows you to move large boulders, upgraded lockpicking to get behind doors, and Arcane, which can show you hidden stashes. Behind these locked doors and barrels is often ammo, which is super scarce normally. If you don't get lockpicking and Leverage, we're talking like a single-digit amount of ammo you find throughout the entire game. However, with them, you have more than enough to kill every enemy that comes your way. Maybe I'm just a weenie, but I think that's cool. That being said, there's absolutely no contest on which combat path is better. It's far and away guns. Melee weapons work fine at the beginning of the game, but towards the end you might as well not even try to kill the enemies with them. So melee in this game is entirely stamina based. Attacking takes stamina, blocking takes stamina, and if you run out you can't do either. Well, you can limply swing your weapon around if you're out, but that's even worse than not attacking. Enemies do a shitload of damage, and the range on their attacks is a little bugged. Like, basically anytime they swing at you, you should block just in case because their attacks hit like 6 feet in front of them. Now, you don't always need to block. If you can fit in your own attack before they get their attack off, usually it'll stagger them and you can get a couple hits in the meantime. Once you learn just how many attacks you can get off on an enemy before they recover, the combat becomes stupidly easy, at the beginning anyway. As far as I know, there's only 4 melee weapons in the game: a shit-ass kitchen knife, a pretty good sickle, an axe, and a sledgehammer. The knife and sickle are the fastest, but you need an axe or a sledgehammer to break down certain obstacles, so you might want to consolidate and only bring one if you're also carrying a gun. Carrying capacity is super limited in this game, and it uses the RE4 style of inventory, where you have to manually arrange all your weapons and items in a suitcase so that they all fit. Anyway, I think the axe and sickle probably do the same damage, but the axe is a little bit slower. The sledgehammer is supposed to do huge damage but be super slow, but honestly I never found it that useful. The thing is so slow that if you can't kill an enemy in one attack, then you're basically cooked. And the only way that'll happen is if you can hit a heavy attack backstab, which of course requires you to have both of those skills, and even then it still might not kill them. Another thing that hurts melee combat in this game is that healing takes forever. The quickest form of healing are these herbs which barely heal you, then the higher you go in terms of healing, the longer they take to use. This makes using bandages and medkits basically impossible in combat unless you're really that far away from enemies. The way melee is supposed to be played is using stealth, because anytime one of the human enemies sees you, they'll let out a shriek that drains your mind towards the end of the game. When your mind gets to 0, any further mind damage you take is converted into health damage, so you can very easily get melted by an enemy shrieking in the next room over. This makes stealth basically the only viable way to play a melee build, unless like me, you just brute force it. Stealth has a huge problem though, and it has nothing to do with the game's mechanics. To sneak in this game, you have to hold down the crouch button. There's no toggling. Now maybe that would be fine if you're playing on keyboard and mouse, but on controller I'm having to hold down L3 for minutes at a time while trying to look around for enemies with the same stick. It hurts my thumb, man. Stealth in general is a little underbaked. Most stealth games have a bunch of ways for you to hide yourself from enemies. You know, like hiding in grass, hiding in closets, disguising as enemies, whatever. In this game, there's none of that. The only way to avoid detection is to simply not go into an enemy's field of view. The game does have bottle throwing, which will distract enemies, but that's it. Guns are much more straightforward. Our boy here was a World War I veteran, so he has no problem with them like a lot of horror protagonists tend to have. He holds them perfectly straight and shoots and reloads at a reasonable speed. But of course the downside is that ammo is super scarce. In fact, you'll have to craft most of it yourself with scrap metal and black powder. There's 4 guns in the game: the snub-nose revolver, double-barrel shotgun, hunting rifle, and then another upgraded version of the revolver you find later. You find them in that order and unlock the crafting recipe shortly after finding the guns themselves. The shotgun though is actually locked behind a lockpicking door. Like I said, 2 distinct paths. Anyway, even the snub-nose is very powerful, but the shotgun is far and away the best weapon in the game. It can like 3-shot the final boss of the game. Of course I say final boss, but if the finish game ever comes out, she'll likely be the first boss. Anyway, ammo crafting is also handled smartly. So scrap metal is found everywhere, but it's also used in a ton of recipes and takes up a lot of inventory space. Black powder is much rarer, but it's only used to craft ammo. Each type of ammo takes a certain amount of each. Revolver ammo takes 1 of each, shotgun takes 1 powder and 2 scrap, and rifle ammo takes the opposite. What this ends up doing is making you choose what kind of ammo you can afford to craft right now because you might need that scrap metal for something else. I actually completely ran out of scrap metal on my second playthrough, where I scavenged so well that I had an abundance of black powder, but made too many shotgun shells to use it all. Anyway, not all Sinner cards are combat or scavenging focused. Some are oriented towards dialogue. One of the abilities that you can unlock allows you to speak with some dead bodies, which does absolutely nothing for you most of the time. Some of them have little quests you can complete to help them pass on, but it's not like a dead body has anything to reward you with. The only reward you'll ever get is information, which can very rarely be used in dialogue to your advantage. It's a useless skill in the current game. A little more useful is speech. Just like any good RPG game, NPCs have speech checks in their dialogues. Sometimes these simply allow you to bypass finding a certain item, like with this chained up blacksmith. He wants you to find his wife who's gone crazy, but can't remember anything you can tell her to calm her down unless you speech his ass. Or alternatively, just find a journal page like the next room over. You can then later speech check your way into convincing his crazy wife to meet up with her husband, and that's where the quest ends. You also get nothing for doing this. The most useful speech check I saw happens after you give the merchant a certain item, after which he unlocks a new shop item and you can try to convince him to give it to you for free. Now I would guess the more of these you do, the better ending you get when the game is finished, but we obviously don't know that yet. Almost anytime you have options in dialogue, you'll get this little message that says, "The eyes saw your choice," and the Steam page says that it's these little decisions that will add up in the end. However, there's no ambiguity on which ending you'll get. The responses are either Jack being an asshole, or Jack being a nice, helpful guy. If you choose to be an asshole, you have to miss out on doing most of the side quests in the game. My favorite response that Jack has is when the chained up blacksmith a guy who's in constant agonizing pain but is prevented from dying by a witch's magic, asks him to free him, and Jack's response is, "What am I, a walking charity?" It costs you nothing but time to help that guy, and you'll probably find the key to free him anyway. It's literally just Jack being a dick. Likewise, you end up finding your dad in a lighthouse, but he doesn't recognize you. Initially, it seems to be because he's hammered, so the old man asks you to find him more booze in exchange for a key to the mines. You then have to go find the booze on the beach, where Jack keeps mentioning a doctor who's on his ship who might have some kind of sobering remedy in his bag. You can totally ignore that though and find a bottle of moonshine to give your old man instead, which ends up being pointless anyway because he doesn't remember you if you sober him up, and he gives you the key either way. The voice acting in this game, where there is acting, is solid. Our main character sounds like a grizzled horror protagonist.
Kingsport looks deserted. Is that a corpse? Where in the hell have I washed up?
Elizabeth sounds fine.
Jack, are you quite all right? I was always attuned to your lies. When your father was still here, he told Stanley, and therefore me, of your otherworldly night terrors.
And your dad is alright.
You ain't my normal visitation. Start flap. Oh, crazy. It's I have a Jack, my young lad. Stubborn as a mute.
When you play this game, you realize very quickly that they have not recorded even a fraction of the total voice lines that the final game would have. Most of the minor side characters will either have no voice at all, or will just say the first line in their dialogue.
A gander, perhaps? My wares are paltry, yet adequate.
Or they'll spit out a little quote like a lot of games do when they don't have full voice acting. Honestly, the acting itself is fine, but I could do without it. I'd probably rather have no voice acting than the state the game is in now. One last note on this. Jack is written how people usually write author characters, meaning he's constantly saying shit that an author would write in a book.
Ruins. I doubt Kingsport will recover from this. If not madness, it'll be me. She could be trapped in that lightless house, but she's resolute. Focus, Jack, focus. My God, the sky. What did I say? Set in damned motion.
Now, there's really only 3 types of enemies in the game so far. Technically 5, but the later 2 enemies are just new versions of the first 2. In the initial village, you find only dogs and witches. Dogs attack super fast, and their attacks build bleed on you, which isn't a huge deal, it just does tiny chip damage, but you have to use a bandage or medkit to heal bleed. They build it even if you block their attacks, which incentivizes you to be aggressive, which works out great because each of your attacks stuns dogs, and they only take like 3 to go down. Witches attack much slower and build no status effect, but they have a ton of health, and won't stagger if you tap them with a weapon like dogs will. To fight witches, you actually need to trade blows with them, preferably blocking their attacks and not running out of stamina. The third enemy is usually not worth killing, ghouls. Ghouls are blind and kind of deaf, but if you make a sound that's loud enough, they will come over to investigate, and if they touch you, then they'll get alert. Ghouls have a shitload of health, far too much to ever worry about killing them with melee. With guns, you can do it, but it'll take a lot out of you, like 4 revolver bullets or 2 shotgun or rifle bullets. They throw these things at you in packs though, so if you try to kill every ghoul in your way, you'll quickly run out of ammo. They also build some weird status effect on you that causes your vision to go all white every once in a while. Like I said earlier, the stealth in this game is super basic, and given the ghouls can't even see you, they're not super hard to sneak by. But the game does love to shove you into tight corridors with them. Anyway, the last area in the game introduces an upgraded version of the dogs and witches. The dogs are now white, and their attacks inflict a mental ailment that causes you to lose your HUD. It's honestly not a huge deal, but besides that, these dogs are menaces. So unlike the normal dogs, they do not stagger when you hit them, meaning that they can just power through your attacks and maul you to death in seconds if you try to melee fight them. It's at this point in the game where melee combat without stealth becomes completely invalid. I mentioned this earlier, but the upgraded witches now let out a shriek when they see you that rapidly drains your mind and can very easily kill you if your mind is too low. They also have a new ranged spitting attack which compensates for how crazy slow they walk. The final boss is the witch Agatha, and it really sucks if you're trying to do melee. It also sucks for guns, but at least with a shotgun you can make it go super quick. Basically what Agatha does is teleport around the arena, which is made up of platforms floating on a liquid that poisons you if you stand in it for too long. Once she teleports, she'll start shooting projectiles at you, which is basically the only way you can tell where she is, other than just jumping around to find her. Agatha has a shitload of health, like I've literally never killed her without just switching her down with a shotgun. For some reason, I decided that on my run on hard mode, I would also do melee only, which sucked ass and I just never beat her on that run. Speaking of hard mode, and I don't know how to feel about this, you guys let me know in the comments. On hard mode, certain items you need will be in different, usually harder to find spots than they are on normal mode. It really tripped me up my first hard mode try because I thought the game was glitched. At this point I'd played through the game twice, so I knew exactly where a bird skull was supposed to be, and so when it wasn't there I was like, what the fuck? Turns out that's a feature. Likewise, in the mines area, you have to solve a puzzle where you place specific items next to certain bodies based on a journal entry you find nearby. On normal, the 4 items are just laying there next to the journal, but on hard they're scattered around the room. On one hand, it makes a second playthrough on the harder difficulty fun and unique. On the other hand, I don't really think puzzles should be included with the difficulty settings. Mainly because even on hard it's not that hard to find these items. I only struggled because I had an expectation of where they should be. I don't really know if this will make sense, but I don't think it's right for difficulty settings to give people a kind of downgraded experience like this. Like generally people who play games on the easiest difficulties probably just don't like challenging combat, like they don't come to games for the combat. So I don't think you should treat them like idiots who can't break a wooden box to find an item as opposed to having it sitting right in front of them. I also just don't like the idea of difficulty settings having a core impact on the game world like this. I also can't really think of another game that does this. Like I know a lot of games will place new items in places so that playing on easy gives you more resources, but I don't think I've ever seen moving around the placement of puzzle items. Now let's finish by talking about the story. So where we're at right now is essentially the beginning, and it doesn't yet make much sense. The general gist is that after exploring ancient African ruins with his father as a kid, Jack has been plagued with otherworldly nightmares and visions his entire life. He ends up getting drafted to World War I, where upon coming back he found his dad missing. His childhood friend Elizabeth, who is an occult expert, has her own reasons for going to Kingsport, which we don't fully know yet. The two arrive and break into the manor only for Elizabeth to be kidnapped by a man called the Shadow Man, who's been harassing Jack on the phone for a while.
Night. Probably when I'm dead. Need to wash. Victoria will be here soon. After all these years.
He essentially tries to blackmail you into helping him stop some kind of apocalypse that these townspeople have brought down onto the world. You can either agree outright, or try to refuse only to be mind controlled by him into agreeing. Unless you have a high enough arcane stat to resist it. So far this doesn't lead anywhere, and we won't see him again. You then find your dad, but he's out of it, only coming back into it when Jack is sucked into another vision, where he frees him from these roots using an otherworldly power gained during the Shadow Man vision. You also meet this kid in town named Frank, who's the son of the head witch Agatha, who got all her girls together to kill every man in town for reasons that aren't entirely clear yet. Shadow Man told you to gather him 2 relics, one of which you gain in a vision, the other of which is held by Frank, who's hiding in this pretty cool maze level. It's basically supposed to look like a never-ending house, but if you just commit and go in one direction, you'll eventually reach the end no matter which way you go. It is a cool level though. Anyway, Agatha then kidnaps Frank and takes both relics from you. You then have to gather 4 spirit urns to confront her, kill her, and that's where the game ends for now. I'm sure there's more lore I'm missing, but that's generally the story. If that sounds intriguing to you, then go ahead and buy the game. I think it's worth it, at least on sale like I got it. But just keep in mind that a lot of it is underbaked and many things haven't come to fruition yet. Not just story-wise either, like there's a whole skill you can get that allows you to equip relics, but as of now there's only 1 relic and all it does is make you immune to poison, which is marginally useful for the Agatha fight. Also, as of now, your decisions mean nothing to the wider story, which I think is a bad sign. Like, imagine if leaving that blacksmith chained and letting a guy who's bleeding out in the beginning die made you able to somehow avoid the fight with Agatha. I don't know, but I think there might be a future for this game where your decisions only impact the ending you get and none of the steps along the way, which is not ideal. All in all though, I think it's a good game. If you like the general setting and vibe of RE8, then you'll probably like this one too. I just need to give one more disclaimer. This is technically the second game in the Stygian series, the first one being a CRPG. Cool, right? Well no, because if you read the Steam reviews, everyone says the same thing. The game was amazing until the studio ran out of money and slapped a horrible ending that wraps nothing up on the end of it. So will that happen here? I don't know, but hopefully not. Thank you all so much for watching.